Hey everyone, welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Lauren, and today I am going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of October. So October was actually a pretty good reading month. I read 7 books with a grand total of 2,479 pages. And the way I rated those books, I had 2 3 stars, 1 4 star, 1 4.5 star, 1 5 star, and 2 books that I did not rate. So if you have been following along on my channel for a while now, you will know that I don't hand out 5-star books very often. In fact, this is only the second 5-star book that I have read in 2021. I've read quite a few 4.5 star books, but yeah, this month I read my second 5-star book, so I am really excited to talk to you guys about that today. So without further ado, let's talk about the books that I read this past month. The first book that I want to talk about is actually one of the books that I did not rate, and it is called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog and Other Stories from a Child Psychiatrist Notebook, and it is by Bruce D. Berry, MD, PhD. This book, I actually had to read it for work. I recently started a new job at a nonprofit organization, and this was actually just kind of an onboarding part of my onboarding to get a better sense of what this organization does. But this was a really great book. It was a fairly quick read. It has a lot to do with child psychology and sort of the psychology behind trauma during childhood, how that affects the brain, and kind of the meeting point between psychology and neurology. So it was really a fascinating read. I will say because it does talk about childhood trauma, and it gives a lot of anecdotes from this doctor about different cases he has seen over the years. It could be quite triggering if you have experienced anything remotely close to this in your life. Beware going into it. But if you are still interested in it, if you like nonfiction, if you like psychology type literature, then I definitely recommend this book. So the first novel that I read this month was The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. This, I can't say too much about it because this book, it is barely 100 pages, but kind of the overarching idea is that it's about a family who is applying for citizenship in Great Britain. And I would call this kind of for me, it was a little bit of just a thriller. Some people might think of this more as like a horror. This is actually the second book that I've read by this author. And honestly, I had pretty similar feelings about it. I thought that it was okay. I think that this book would actually be a lot more effective to a person who has never read anything quite like this before. I feel like I've experienced things similar to this in the past, so it didn't really do anything new, but it was a decent read. It was a quick read, fun read. I gave this book 3 stars. If you like stuff like Black Mirror, this has sort of a Black Mirror feel to it, so if you enjoy that sort of stuff, then you may really enjoy The Test. The next book that I read this month was The Eyre Affair by Jasper Fforde. This kind of is, I would say it's a cross between sci-fi and fantasy, so sci-fantasy. It's set in a world where time travel is possible. You can literally jump in and out of books. It's very whimsical. It's a very whimsical setting, and it is about the main character is a woman who is a literary detective who solves literary crimes, and she's investigating this literary crime that has happened. This is a very high action book with a lot of moving parts, and it is written in Jasper Fforde, just his standard style. If you've ever read a book by him, very satirical, very cheeky and off the cuff. I absolutely love Jasper Fforde's style, but for me, I think this book tried to do just a little bit too much, and it was a little tiring to read. I don't know if I can say the word little anymore. A tiny bit tiring to read. So yeah, I only gave this 3 stars. It was a decent read, but definitely not my favorite of his Yeah, so 3 stars for The Eyre Affair. The next book on the list is Borne by Jeff Vandermeer. This is a kind of a post-apocalyptic sci-fi novel, and it is about this world that is really just kind of a junk-filled wasteland, and it is about a woman and her partner that live in this wasteland and do everything they can to survive. And one day this woman finds this creature that she doesn't know what it is. It's very bizarre. She's never seen anything quite like it, and ends up naming it Borne. And this book is about her sort of relationship to this creature. And I don't know. I don't want to say much more than that. It's mostly just kind of a survival novel, and like a lot of post-apocalyptic novels, you're trying to figure out, what went wrong, why this world is the way it is, so on and so forth. I absolutely loved this book. I really love the way Jeff Vandermeer writes. He is one of my favorite authors, and I have to say, of all of his books that I've read, which I've only read a few so far, but nonetheless, this is definitely in my opinion, the best that I've read, and absolutely the most accessible, I think, that I've read. This is it. This is my 5-star book. It was just, for me, this book was absolutely perfect. Everything from the writing style to the pacing, conceptually, this book made me feel all the feels deep down in my heart. I shed a tear while I was reading this at one point. I just thought that it was absolutely beautiful. If you have never picked up a Jeff Vandermeer book, or if you have read another one of his books and found it kind of difficult to read, I would definitely say pick this book up. It is really kind of the cream of the crop in his books, in my opinion. So yeah, 5 stars for Borne. I definitely recommend that you pick this one up. The next book that I read in October was A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge. This was actually, I read this for the October Buzzword Challenge prompt, which was Elements, I think. This is a sci-fi novel. It is a space opera. This book, I think it was written like in the early 90s, and it won a Hugo Award. So it was a very high quality novel, and I agree with that. This book has two sort of parallel storylines going on. When the book opens, the first storyline is about this family. They're trying to escape this planet where there has been some sort of disaster, and they find this other planet that is life-supporting, and so they go and land on this planet, and this planet already has inhabitants on it. It's very unusual life form, I'll say. And then the other storyline it's kind of about stepping back and looking at the universe as a whole. This disaster on this planet has sort of unleashed this blight. And there are people who are trying to get to the planet from the first storyline because they believe there is some sort of weapon or something on this planet that can help to fight this blight. I loved this book. I thought the writing style was excellent. This actually, I feel like if you have read Children of Time and enjoyed that, you should definitely give this book a shot. It is written quite similarly, like the writing style is quite similar. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. There were some elements of this that I felt like weren't explained well enough, so I knocked it down just a little bit. But aside from that, it was excellent. This is definitely a worthwhile read. If you enjoy science fiction, if you enjoy space operas, and you have not picked up A Fire Upon the Deep, I definitely recommend that you do. The next book that I read in October, and it's kind of funny why, was Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. If you have not read this book, this is an extremely wholesome book. It was written, I think, in like the late 1800s. It is about a young girl, Anne Shirley, who is an orphan and ends up being adopted by this brother and sister. They're a little bit older, and they had originally wanted to adopt a boy, but their wires got crossed and they wound up with a girl. girl. She's not what they were expecting at all, but they end up it's magical. They love her. It's so wonderful. And yeah, it's such a sweet story. I've read this book a few times before, and this is the second book I didn't rate because I've read it a few times before. I read this whenever I was quite a bit younger. It has some sentimental value to me, so it's a 5-star in my heart. I can't look at it objectively. I do love this book though, and the reason that I ended up reading this book is actually because the next book that I'm going to talk about, which needed to be broken up a little bit with something a little bit more gentle, a little bit more wholesome, sort of like whenever you watch a scary movie and then you have to like watch some cartoons afterwards before you go to bed. This is pretty much what this book was doing for me. So nonetheless, I still enjoyed it. I'll probably read this book again and again throughout my life and love it just as much every single time. So yeah, that is Anne of Green Gables. If you want something super wholesome and you have never read this book, then you are missing out. You need to pick this book up. The final book that I read in the month of October, the book that I needed to sandwich Anne of Green Gables in with it, was House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. This is a, what would you call this? Oh man, this book is so many things. You could call it a horror, you could call it a fantasy, you could call it urban fantasy, or maybe some sci-fi elements in it, some weird fiction. It's a lot of different things. The reason that I decided to pick this book up is that it was the monthly pick for Steve Talks Books and Stuff, his forum. This was the October pick, and I actually ended up doing a live show discussing this book. It was me and Steve from Steve Talks Books and Stuff and Ashley from Read Now, Sleep Later. I'll leave the link down in the comments below if you're interested, if you want to watch it. I'm not going to go into great detail about this. If you want to hear my thoughts on it, then definitely go and check that live discussion out. We really sort of pulled this apart and dissected it and went to some pretty deep discussions about this. This book, it's one of those books that you could read it 1,000 times and you would see something different every single time that you read it. If you have heard of this book, then you know that it is fairly notorious for being considered one of the scariest books ever written, and that is very subjective. You may or may not find it scary depending on what scares you. For me, this book, I don't know that I would call it flat out scary, but it was extremely unsettling. It's kind of told in a sort of a found manuscript style. It's a kind of a story within a story within a story. Sort of the overarching story, it is about a family that moves into a house that is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And I do not mean that in a Harry Potter sort of way. It is very creepy. It is about this family. They're kind of coming apart at the seams a little bit, and it's very thematically rich. It's well known for having a very unusual format. Some of the pages will have a little bit of writing or only one word on them, or strange orientations of text. And if you like that kind of thing in a book, which I do, I really like books that have unusual formats. For me, I don't know, I just think it's really cool. So that was a fun experience, just like physically reading this book. The design of that is I just think it's really, really cool. The story is told just so beautifully, so wonderfully. The emotions that it sort of stirred in me, like this book, I just love this book. I think that having sort of stewed on this for a couple of weeks at this point, I think I'm going to give this book 4.5 stars. This book has some pretty dry sections in it that kind of come across as like sort of they feel kind of like a textbook, and they're a little bit difficult to get through. And I think a lot of people, when they try to read this book, end up putting it down because of those patches in the book. So, and whenever I find myself sort of skimming and trying to get through sections, that's not always a great sign. That being said, it is worth putting in the effort to get through those sections. This book, it is excellent. I don't think it's for everyone. It's really not. You may hate this book. You may DNF this book, but if you're the right audience for this book, if you're willing to if you're willing to commit to it and put in the time and the effort it takes to get through it, I've never read anything like this. It is fantastic. If you've ever considered picking up this book, just give it a shot. Like just give it a shot. Yeah, so 4.5 stars for House of Leaves. So I think that is going to be it for me today. These are all of the books that I read in the month of October. I would be really curious to know if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them. So I hope that you will talk to me in the comments down below. Thank you for joining me today while I talked about all these books. I really appreciate you being here with me. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like it and possibly subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.